Okay, so what's happened over the last 24 hours?
So the process of making a determination of whether or not the Grace 1 was still going to be on a route to an EU-sanctioned beneficiary has come to an end. We have received the assurance that we needed in order to confirm to us that if she is released, the Grace 1, whether or not she was going to an EU-sanctioned entity, will no longer go to an EU-sanctioned entity. So we now know and can demonstrate with documentary evidence both that she was definitely going to Syria, to the Banyas refinery when we stopped her, so we are vindicated in the action that we took, and that she is not now going to an EU-sanctioned entity, and that is really the only jurisdiction that we have under the Sanctions Act to stop her from going anywhere, that she is actually now on a route to an EU-sanctioned entity, and she's no longer on that route, and therefore the legal notice I've issued lifts the specification of the vessel under Section 39 of the Sanctions Act.
Now, of course, the legal process was adjourned because of an 11th hour application by the United States Department of Justice. On what basis was that application made?
So if you look at what happened in court today, the Attorney General representing the government of Gibraltar under the Sanctions Act was informing the court of the process that we had gone through, of the information that had been obtained, of the undertaking that had been obtained. Separately, the mutual legal assistance request from the United States was being dealt with by another division of the government law officers, which is the division that deals with mutual legal assistance requests, and that is not something which engages the government politically, and is not something on which I am at liberty to comment, or indeed something on which I am involved.
Well, Iran itself has seized a British tanker in retaliation for the detention of the Grace 1. So how much of your decision-making is influenced by the political situation and the need for diplomacy?
So those issues which you've seen play out on the news, the issues relating to the JCPOA and the seizing by Iran of a number of vessels, one of them the Stena Imperio, none of those have been brought to bear in the context of the determinations we've had to make. We've had to make determinations which are very cold, which are based on a legal analysis, which are based on the EU sanctions regulations, and all of our views that we should not be allowing the Assad regime in Syria to get its hands on $140 million worth of assets and benefit. So in that context, we've excluded any considerations about those political issues that you've seen. We have wanted to de-escalate because we don't want to escalate tensions with Iran. That's why I met with the Iranian embassy officials in London. That's why we wanted to receive their assurances that this was not going to go to an EU-sanctioned entity, so that we could then allow the Grace 1 to go on its way, but that its way should not be a way that would take the benefit of that cargo to an EU-sanctioned entity.
You say in the revocation order that the release of the Grace 1 is in the public interest. Would it not have been in the public interest to not detain it in the first place?
Nothing could have been further from the public interest. Now, let's understand what was happening here. There was a vessel in Gibraltar waters that was going to ply its trade in breach of EU sanctions. Those who call Gibraltar a haven of piracy, etc., would have been absolutely right in all of their negative and facetious accusations against us if we had allowed a vessel that was en route to breach European sanctions to the benefit of the Assad regime in Syria to be victualled in Gibraltar, to have spares provided in Gibraltar, and then have gone merrily on its way. Instead, what we've demonstrated, and this is the public interest, is that Gibraltar's jurisdiction cannot ever be abused to breach the international rules-based legal order, or indeed in particular to breach European Union sanctions which are applied against a regime that all of us have seen how it has acted against its own people. And so therefore anybody who thinks that it was right to simply shirk away and turn our backs and allow this to go through our waters and do nothing about it is not, in my view, keeping the best interests of Gibraltar and its reputation internationally in mind when making decisions. And the government, I think, has first and foremost to have the public interests of Gibraltar in mind, and Gibraltar's international reputation is one of the key factors when we determine that public interest, in particular the observance of the rule of law in Gibraltar and Gibraltar's observance of the international rules-based legal order.
So the ship is legally free to leave. There is an outstanding request from the United States to detain it. What happens now?
Well, those are issues relating to independent prosecutorial, mutual legal assistance decisions, which politicians don't ever become involved in. This one just happens to cut across a decision where a politician is involved in the guise of the chief minister under the Sanctions Act. But that one is resolved now, and there is the possibility that any number of claims could be made against this vessel. One of them is the extant DOJ decision or application. But look, any vessel that passes through Gibraltar waters is subject to its admiralty jurisdiction. Gibraltar is known internationally for being a very versatile admiralty jurisdiction. There could be another boat coming into British Gibraltar territorial waters where masters may not have paid crewmen, and there may be lawyers in Gibraltar making applications to arrest that vessel through the admiralty jurisdiction. And the Grace 1 is now just another one of those vessels subject to all the other rules and regulations that apply within the jurisdiction of the court in Gibraltar and the prosecutorial authorities in Gibraltar. The Sanctions Act aspect is the only part of our law that has now played out its course. All the others could play out, and the government is not at all involved in that.